It is my extreme pleasure to introduce to you all Harold Davis, an award-winning photographer, the author of several best-selling books about photography and image processing, and his artwork. We have some in the back of the room. You're going to see some on the slides. It's been shown all around the world, so we're really excited for Harold to be here with us to share, the passion and the story behind the photos. And with that, please welcome me in joining Harold Davis.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. It's really fun to be at Google, the thing I use every day, all the time, for everything. So hi, everyone. I'm a photographer and a writer. And when I was asked to think about this talk, what Shilpa said to me is, tips and techniques to help people become a better photographer is what is going to matter to them. I started to think about this, and, I don't know how to put this very politely, but the fact is that for technically competent people, which I'm going to make the assumption that everyone in this room is, the technical part of pragmatic photography can be encapsulated in somewhere between 6 and 12 slides. So that's not the hard part. The hard part is the non-technical part. It's a non-hierarchical field that once you master the gear and the theory of exposure is more about feeling, spirituality, things that are a bit more touchy-feely. So I decided to call my talk The Zen of Photography. And here's a message from your sponsor, my book that's for sale out there. This is a new hot-off-the-press book. It's called The Photographer's Black and White Handbook. I'm the author of 19 photography books, some of which have been bestsellers. I'm also the author of about 30 other books on a variety of topics. This was my previous photography book, which was called Achieving Your Potential as a Photographer. And the one before that, The Way of the Digital Photographer. And here are some of my backlist titles on Photoshop, on black and white photography, night photography, macro photography. I've been translated into about 20 languages. This is the Spanish edition of one of my black and white books. Lest you think I only know about photography, if you look carefully at these slides, you'll note that my name is on these books related to Google, including the still in print Google Advertising Tools in its second edition. So I've had a number of lives. And I'm going to say that there's more to life than a cubicle. That said, if I can convey the sense in this talk that what every field that's worth doing is about a soaring imagination, that would be what I want to convey. You can have a soaring imagination in a cubicle, in fact. But I have lived a life since I left programming and IT behind that has been very adventurous and taken me to some incredibly wild places. This talk is organized into a section on black and white and then a somewhat mirroring section on color. So let's start with this image of a workbench. It's an antique Russian workbench in Fort Ross, where the Russians back in the 19th century owned about half of what's now California. And we'll note that I created this photograph to look as much like an etching as a photo. So I am a post-film digital photographer. Somebody has put that as, one of my collectors said, Harold, what you really do is you use photographs as your source material, digital photographs as your source material, and you paint with them. And that's a fairly accurate depiction. What I do is one part digital painting and one part photography. It's important to realize that essentially what a camera is these days, is a computer with a lens at one end and a scanner at the other end. I call this image the road less traveled. And basically, it's a foggy day near where I live at the Green Dragon Zen Monastery. And there are two roads, and you can make a choice. Take the easy one, or take the hard one, or try to live up fully to your potential. What is it that you can do that's most worth doing? One thing that photographers at a certain point run into is many images have been made already. Ansel Adams made essentially a great image from the spot tunnel view in Yosemite Valley, and you go there, and when the light is pretty good, you see about 50 photographers lined up with tripods making the image, but it's still worth doing. I use this image of a slot canyon in Arizona to show that even though you have tons of information in photography, it's not always wise to show it. The photographs you've seen are largely what are called monochromatic HDR photographs, namely they're bracketed sequences of shots. But with this image, the black area at the bottom, the triangle, and up at the top, I had plenty of information to reproduce every detail in there, but I chose not to make a dramatic ribbon of light at the top. So the topic of light is something that comes up a great deal in photography for good reasons. Not only is it built into the word photography, writing with light, but as a matter of physics, it's absolutely impossible to photograph an object. All you can capture using a sensor is light that is emitted or reflected by an object, one or the other. So one of the really important things as you start to looking to take your photos beyond the just common level is to analyze the light that's coming in. Is it reflected? Is it emitted? What is it reflected or emitted by? That will get you pretty far in terms of understanding it. This is a nice reflection in a pond up in Maine at Maine Media Workshops where I teach. So many black and white images are best done where there's essentially an absence of visual color anyhow. One of the ways you say, hey, is something going to work for black and white, is to look out and say, there's not much color here anyhow, and at night is a good time to find that. During the day, this would essentially have been impossible to make in black and white or color because it'd be full of people, but at night there's nobody there, and you can get a nice range, dynamic range from darkest dark to blackest white. An overlooked but very difficult part of being a professional or serious amateur photographer today is data management. I have upwards of 100 terabytes of data. I have to be able to find stuff. When I have a client who wants to license an image from 10 years ago, I need to be able to find the relevant files. So one of the things I help educate photographers in is how to maintain a content management system for photography. So there are many ways you can get black and white images. You can set your camera to do a black and white JPEG, and then the next image you turn it off so you can have black and white color. But the recommendation for high quality black and white that can be reproduced like the prints of mine you see in the back, or in really high quality, or like the book that is back there, is to create a 4-color image and then using one or more raw files, and the loop towards I guess your right on this particular diagram is the question of whether it's one or more files. Convert it to color, and then use a layered conversion to black and white. So this is a little bit like the old zone system was for chemical photography, because using targeted layers, layer masks, and painting tools, you can say exactly how you want to convert each part of an image to black and white, and it doesn't all have to be the same. And that's a really important point. Essentially, there's a hierarchy of black and white conversion techniques where one axis here is the effort involved, and the other is the quality. This could be summed up: no pain, no gain. So I spent a lot of time in the darkroom. In the Photoshop Darkroom. Generally, for any kind of photography, what really happens is you get some kind of concept, and then you go out and you try and photograph it, and there's a recognition of whether you got it, and then you go back and you say, how did it work? Oh, maybe it didn't work so well, let me plan to do it again. And then you go and you process it, and ultimately at the bottom of this hierarchy of things you do, you edit, and edit is a hugely important process in photography. And then you show it. You print it, you put it in a book. I don't feel I really understand any of my images until they're beyond the monitors. You can't really tell for sure how good an image is as long as it is only seen digitally on monitors. So I worry most about whether my images convey a quality of emotion. That's what I care about. And you can take a fairly commonly photographed object like this Nautilus shell. Somewhat counterintuitively, I photographed this Nautilus shell on a white light background. There was light coming through it, and then I transformed it into a black background in Photoshop. And it's been a standout image, reproduced many, many times all over the place, and people don't really understand that part of the reason for that is the glow that's coming through the shell, which you wouldn't see if you lit it differently. Of course, you can also go and see whether you can shoot vegetables to look like women or waves coming in the ocean. And one of the really fun things about photography is the way you can control how motion is rendered, such as the motion of water in these waves. It's the shutter speed setting, which is very badly named because it's not actually a speed, it's a duration of time. So that's a good takeaway for the 6 technical slides. Shutter speed is not a speed, it is a duration of time. And how motion is going to be rendered depends upon how much time you expose the subject to the medium in your camera. A tell with this photo that it's not exactly what it seems in terms of the lighting is the fact that the freighter in the background has lights on. So this was captured at about midnight on a dark, cloudy night. The long exposure makes for the luminosity in the clouds and the water. And again, this is really a question of the light. From a digital camera's point of view, if you vary the exposure to vary for the quantity of light, it doesn't really care whether it's low light or high light very much. There are a couple of footnotes on that, but that's basically true. And again, another long exposure water image, the Cayucas Pier off the coast of California. One of the things I look for in my black and white images is what's called high key and low key imagery. This is a bridge over near Astoria, Oregon, over a big bay, and my purpose in doing it was to go from dark on the left to light on the right. And this is the opposite, a dark image at night, where the purpose is to create a sort of dark look about it. And the sun setting behind Bixby Bridge on the Big Sur coast, which, by the way, as you may know, is now closed to all traffic because of 45 mudslides all along the coast or something. With this night shot of the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, what I did was I timed it so that the moon was behind the pillar of the bridge there. A joke is that it used to be hard to do things like this, and these days there are a couple of different apps that let you calculate sun-moon position angle. One is called the Photographer's Ephemeris, TPE, and it's basically a Google Maps mashup that's got the right sun and moon charts in it. Safety pin is an object in California. It says, if you're an immigrant, you're okay with us. We're not going to turn you in. So I don't know whether that's a symbol here yet or not, but it is for us. So one of the things that used to be, when I was a film photographer in the darkroom, I used to use chemicals to create toning. There was a process called solarization, where you would turn the light on in the darkroom and partly expose the paper as it was processing. Well, there are various simulated ways to do the same technique with black and white photography in the digital darkroom. Also, you can use things like mobile phones and mobile phone apps. So the last 2 photographs that I've shown you are iPhone apps. This is an iPhone app also. And what I have found recently is that there's actually a market for reasonable size prints that I make on the iPhone. And one of these days, I'm going to just give up the big cameras and the 30-pound gear on my back and just carry my iPhone around. Well, maybe, as if. People look at this image and is it Chinese mountains? No, it's a beach with sand, and you can see the footprints at the top. So it's Seeing is what photography is really about. With this one, I timed it so that the moon was rising in increments enough that it bisected the previous shot of the moon. The cables you see there are the Golden Gate Bridge. And one neat trick you can do in black and white is you can invert images. This is like in the chemical darkroom, the difference between positive and negative. A negative was the negative and a print was the positive. Well, these days you can do the same thing and flip back and forth easily. So if you want to create an image like this Tuscan road in an antique frame, it's really pretty easy to do that. This image of the rooftops of Paris is what's called split-toned in black and white. In other words, sorry about that, I processed part of it for the roofs for one tonality and the buildings for another to create greater gradations in the size of the building. Point here really in this sepia-toned image is that the circumflex is like a little face alone on the keyboard, and another sepia image. So some of my images are what's called monochromatic HDR, which means they're extra high resolution black and white done through a sequence of captures that are combined. And things like this one, where if you think about where the sun is coming up under this dragon in the Anza Borrego Desert, this side of the dragon would be totally black, but it's blended together so that I have the white and the black. And the last was the wheels that run the San Francisco cable cars, and this is a slot canyon in Arizona. And as you can see, my photography in recent years has taken me all over the world. And it's also taken me to places like this, which is under the Berkeley, California Pier. And I got to share it with rats and crabs. So being a photographer professionally is not for the squeamish necessarily. It is for people who enjoy seeing beautiful things. This is along the Kemonokoto pilgrimage trail in Japan in the Kii Mountains, and it's called the View of 10,000 Peaks from a particular pass. There are about maybe 100 I could count, but they say 10,000. Now, if you just noticed, there's a black and white version, and here's a color version of the same. Here's a color version of the shot of the pyramid and the Louvre court that I showed you a couple of slides ago as well. So my pattern here is that I'm mirroring back and I've moved into color. But the point really is you don't have to decide whether you're doing black and white or color until you come to process the image. You shoot everything the same, really, as an RGB color raw file. So digital photography is a reality. No, it's not reality, it's art. If I were a journalist, there would be a strict code about what I had to do, and I would hope I would adhere to it. But as a photographic artist, I can do whatever I want and wherever my imagination takes me. I like to photograph glasses at the dinner table when I'm traveling, since I do so much traveling. And this I think of as the eye of Sauron in a wine glass. And this one, it was more intentional because what I did was I put a marble on a piece of paper, lit it with a single strong light, and then I blended a shot of the ocean into the shadow. So yeah, obviously something like this is a photo composition with a Nautilus Shell and a drawing rendered of a photo. So it's a drawing coming to life kind of. And similarly with this is an in-camera multiple exposure done with choreography with a single model and studio strobes. And this also, I had the model basically pirouette on a ring in the air and photographed her about 8 times. And similarly here, the effect is one of an Indian goddess. So a camera is an extension of ourselves. For me, it's a way to explore, to get to know things, to understand things, to see the things I love about this wonderful earth of ours, to explore what happens with time. This is an 8-minute exposure. What happens to the roaring waves of the Pacific when they roar in at 8 minutes? They smooth out and get calm. This is Tuscany. This is the Lombard region of lakes in Italy at dawn with the blue light of dawn. The joke about photographers who care about color is that what you really care about is the blue light at dawn and then the golden hour, a half hour before sunset, and the blue light after that golden hour, and you can sleep the rest of the day. And this is more or less true. It's a hill town in France and a hill town in Italy. So, yes, let's wonder about what's out there. That's a great goal for photography. This is the town and monastery of Nachisan, which is at the inland sea terminus of the Kimono-Kodo Trail in Japan. And I tried to add painting elements to this image to make it look a bit like Shangri-La, a park in the suburbs of Paris. People. Proper study of people is people. This guy had 4 kids, and he had them all tattooed on himself. I have 4 kids too, but I'm not going to tattoo them on me. This is my youngest, my daughter Katie Rose. There she is. There they are. There. It's a model that I photographed for a while in Paris. My third son. Here he is again. There am I. You got to take things a little lightly sometimes. That's just to see if you're awake. Want to take better photos? Well, the first thing you say is stand in front of more interesting things. Yeah, if you go to the Marin Headlands in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, you'll take better pictures probably. But the real trick is to have something interesting to say. Every photo is a kind of narrative. And it's a poem or a story, and you can't do a great narrative without some idea of who you are. Now, this one, okay, there's a nice list there on the right, but leaving that outside, consider this an example of multitasking. By the way, so, potty, meal, mouse, and clicker, my son hates it when I show this slide. I'm a digital painter, and I use photos from my source material. One of the interesting things about photography is that there's so many different uses you can make of it. This image I call A Kiss for a Rose, and it's sort of interesting from a Google perspective, because if you search Google Images for Georgia O'Keeffe Rose, this is always on the return list, which, since she's a great painter, I don't mind. Yeah, one of the things I really love to photograph are flowers. This is an arrangement that I shot on a backlit light box. Somebody said to me, it looks like Bulgarian folk art, but I actually think of it as a low geostationary orbit of jasmine buds around a clematis. So it all depends how you look at things. And more light box flower photography. So one of the ways that it's interesting to print some of these images is to take nice exotic papers and make them look like something special. Like this image of the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona can look beautiful on a metallic paper. In my book, Achieving Your Potential, there's a story of a hero's journey at the end where people can fill out their stops. And in some ways, being an artist or a photographer is like going on a journey and taking a quest. And sometimes, if you're open to things, there are side trips on the quest. Beginner's mind is great. I envy anybody in here who doesn't know much about photography, because that means you can experiment. You can try anything you want. And you don't have to say, okay, each image has to be really good. You just try it and see. That's really how I learned. I tried everything I could think of. And I'm going to just finish it up with a couple of night images. The last one you saw was the Jem El Thana in Marrakesh, the place of the dead, where they have camels and everything else you can imagine. This is about a 2-hour exposure off Point Reyes, and look what happens again to the giant rollers from the Pacific when you calm them out like that. This is a about 3-hour exposure in the great bristlecone pine forest of the White Mountains of California, and these are the world's oldest living things. Imagine. So these kinds of photos of the night that I take that are multiple hour exposures are kind of like the world as a tree or a rock sees them. It's also worth noting that, as Vincent van Gogh said, the colors of the night can be as vibrant and charged as the colors of the day. I like answering emails related to photography, and here's some of my contact info in my blog. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Harold, for sharing all those wonderful pictures and insights. So now I get the opportunity to ask you some questions about the inspiration behind, going into photography and why you kind of started in this discipline. So I read that you actually went to computer science school and had a math major as well, and then went to law school. And then what changed the direction of what you were focusing to go into something so much more creative?
Well, they're two separate questions. I mean, thank you. Law school wasn't for me. I'm just not cut out to be a lawyer. But in terms of my background as a computer programmer, it's something I still love, and I think it's a very creative endeavor. And I think it has a lot in common with being a photographer at its highest practices. There's a very Zen aspect to good programming. And
thank you for noting that, because I think that's important to showcase that both elements, I guess, are creative in their own art form. And how have you kind of leveraged that foundation with what you do today in processing?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, at the sort of core level, I'm not scared of computers, and I'm not scared. I worked for an enterprise database company. I know how to create a CMS. Yeah. And I know how to write Photoshop macros, and I joked I've written probably a dozen books on programming languages from C# to Java and so on, and I worked for major software houses and so on. And I joke the only thing I program these days are Photoshop macros, but it's so important. I mean, after all, what you have with a digital photo are bits of information, just like in a computer, and you have to have some sense of how you can organize these and use them. True, I'm using a high-level program in Photoshop with visual feedback, but still having some concept of the modeling that's going on underneath and what calculations it's making is really crucial.
Did you, thank you for sharing that. Did you find that translating and kind of molding that background and applying it to photography and to writing was difficult? Did you find changing that mindset or kind of?
That's a great question, Shilpa. I mean, there are a couple of aspects to it. Writing a book is really, when it's a technical how-to book, at any rate, is an issue of organization largely. If you have a good outline, then each chapter is writing a term paper in college. I don't know about you, but I was pretty good at term papers in college. In fact, I partly worked my way through college with writing term papers for other people.
Wow, I needed you.
But so, I mean, a book, when you break it down, if you're well organized and you break it down into bite-sized pieces, that's what's involved in writing a book. You can't teach something to somebody unless you understand it. And at the same time, teaching it or writing a book about it is a great way to learn it more deeply, because you really have to know it to explain it and write about it. On the other hand, there really is a different mindset from working for a technology company and being a free creative person. And sometimes I sort of almost have to turn a switch for myself.
I know, I find that even personally when I try to do that, it's a struggle to switch between the two hats, but you've done it so well and integrated the two together so beautifully, as we saw today. So talking about the book, The Photographer's Black and White Handbook, you alluded to it, but let's talk a little bit more about why only black and white.
Well, one of the things that works very well with photography is to intentionally choose limits.
Okay.
Because that gets you some constraints that you can kind of bounce against. So I like doing that in a number of ways. I mean, sometimes I'm going to say, hey, I'll go out and just photograph with one lens today, one focal length, or maybe one aperture. So black and white is interesting that way. But it's also interesting because color is very seductive. When you see something in color, it's like you're going to go to that first, and it hides a multiplicity of flaws. Portraying something in black and white is like portraying its bones, the essence of the thing. Composition matters much more in black and white photography than it does in color. There's also an instinctive reaction that people have when you present something in black and white, because they know it isn't natural. It's not the world. This business that photography is reality, which is never true anyhow, is that's cut when you say black and white because they know it's not reality. So it's a way of setting it off and saying this is art that is strong and powerful. And that also has a little bit to do with the historical roots of photography because it was black and white for so long, up until the late 1950s, really.
And so if there's a varying level of photographers in the audience today, so if they're interested in capturing a really beautiful black and white image, is there a certain equipment list, a certain tool to use in post-production or post-imaging that you would recommend?
Well, the best camera to use is the one you have with you. That sounds like a piece of sophism, kind of, but it's very true. So I would say the first piece of advice I would have is start carrying a camera around with you, because what often happens is we hit something and for some reason we don't stop to take a photo of it. Like on my way walking down here, I passed a fire hydrant and the top of the hydrant had this wonderful hexagonal shiny nut on top of it behind a red thing. So I stopped with my iPhone and took a square, took the time to compose it right and did a symmetrical shot of the fire hydrant. So I'm not a gearhead. I mean, that's one of the things that this comes up a fair amount in my workshops and stuff. It's just not the most important part. That said, if you want to do some of the things I do professionally, which is to like reproduce a mural that's 10 feet by 20 feet with nice resolution or something like that, you do need high resolution gear, good lenses, tripods, good technique, and so on. I do recommend Photoshop as the tool to use for processing photos, but Lightroom, Adobe's other offering, is also pretty good.
Okay, great. And then in terms of apps, you had mentioned that there's some apps that you use on your iPhone, or for folks out there that use Android as well. What apps would you recommend for image filtering or post?
Here's a message from our sponsor. The go-to app on the iPhone is Google Snapseed. It beats anything else out there by about an order of magnitude.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So, I actually have a list of recommended apps and that I use, and I'd be happy to send it to anyone who wants it, who sends me an email. Besides that, I do like some of the painterly apps. There's a thing called Waterlog. That's really good. There are a variety of things. Oddly, you can actually do layers and masking on the iPhone. There's an app called Leonardo that lets you do gradients, layers, masking, and so on. I mean, I find when I'm doing that I must be totally insane and obsessive compulsive, because here I am painting a mask on a stupid little screen, but you can do it.
Well, thank you. I already spent an hour filtering using Instagram filters, so I can only imagine opening up to the world of apps. I will spend 5 hours probably filtering a picture. So thank you for that. And one thing that you mentioned on one of the slides was interesting. You said that that in order to really capture a great picture, you need to become an interesting person, as a matter of fact. So how did you, in your life, or how do you define what is interesting?
Yes.
Like,
I mean, there's no single answer to that. But try to not be a narrow person. Try and be nice to the people around you. Try and read a lot. Go exploring. Go hiking. Embrace trees.
Okay, so, if there's somebody out there that's like, am I interesting? Am I not sure? It's kind of just be who you are and then kind of take it from there to capture the moment.
Be who you are, but more so.
Okay. Well, that should be easy enough.
You think.
And so I did want to give the chance audience to ask a question. So if there's 2 mics as well, so feel free to jump up and queue up if you have any questions for Harold.
So I have a question about ratios of photos that you take to the ones that you actually are worth showing and that you would publish somewhere. Like, is your technique like you would go out and say take like 1,000 photos in a day, or are you looking for very specific compositions and you kind of know what you want before you take it, so you take a lot fewer? And I'm also curious, like, it would be very interesting to see the ones that were dead on, that were worth publishing, versus the ones like sort of near maybe the same subject, but the composition isn't quite right, and like an analysis of like what was not quite right about that and how you fixed it in a subsequent shot.
No, it's a great question. I mean, the fact of life is that, like everybody who's a professional photographer, I shoot many things I never want to show anyone. And you probably would have to put, things under my fingernails to get me to show you the bad ones. So, yeah, but nonetheless, what your point really is very, very well taken. And interestingly, I find, I do lead workshops, and what I find is that I tend to photograph less than the people in my workshops. I mean, I am somewhat targeted in what I do, and I do often have an idea in advance of what it's going to be or why I'm doing it, and I wait till I see something really good to take the photo. But that said, of a given session where, let's say, just off the top of my head, I took 200 raw files, I might have one. So another way to look at this is consider that if you had a painter who did one great painting a week, okay, that would be 52 great paintings a year. That would be 150 great paintings in 3 years. That would beat Picasso cold. Mm-hmm. So somehow photographers are expected to do more than that, and it's not realistic. But it's in my interest as a professional not to show crappy work. So I try to be sensible about that. The other thing is that you can't judge it immediately after taking it. That's not possible, because you're not objective. I couldn't take a picture if I didn't think, hey, there's something here. I love it. So I'm in love with my photos when I take them. When I look at them back on a monitor, and part of the trick to this is to look at them both big and small. You want to see them at 100% on a huge monitor. You also want to see what they look like as a thumbnail. And usually my reaction is, what the hell was I thinking? And maybe 6 months later, I have some kind of realistic. I can see what I was thinking, and they're halfway good, halfway bad. Fundamentally, by the way, I don't throw images away. I mean, if something is totally black, I'll delete it. But otherwise, I long ago made the decision that, considering how cheap storage space is, it's really more expensive to take the time to go through them well and avoid, that I'm going to throw away some things I later want. So if I'm not very careful, and to take the time to be very careful about doing that is a mistaken resource of priority, basically. There's no magic word with this. The other thing I'd say is that the process of digital photography itself sometimes requires overshooting, because A, I do a lot of bracketed sequences, and B, since part of what I do sometimes is put disparate things together from a similar scene, I want to try to cover all bases when I'm in a thing. I mean, if I'm going, for example, next month to the world's largest cave in Vietnam, which is quite an expedition to get to, and so on, and the real cost is getting me there. It's not what I do once I'm there. And if I'm there and taking an image, I want to make sure I get all pieces that I might possibly need. So that leads to a bit of overshooting. And obviously, I don't end up using all those pieces a lot of the time. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
How has that changed since you made the switch from film to digital? Were you overshooting on film as well?
No, it was too expensive. No, you had to be. I mean, what I do find in my workshops is that some of the best students are people who had a real background in film photography, because there was a discipline to that in some ways you just don't have with digital, because it's so easy to just keep pressing that button.
Hi. I just started taking photos. Do you have any simple tricks to take a photo when you are facing a light source and taking a photo of a person?
Well,
it just shows up as black when I take it.
Yeah, so it's going to do that. Again, what I said is watch the light. So that's what's called a backlit situation. So you've got two ways you can deal with that if you want. If you were a professional photographer and someone said, I'm handing you your day rate, you've got to make a decent portrait of this person with a backlight. Technique number one, and probably the best bet, is to use what's called a fill flash strobe in the front. So you take a flash unit, you attach it via either a wireless or wireline to the camera, You hold it up here, you have some kind of diffuser in it, you use the controller in your camera to set it to fill mode so it isn't going to totally blanch out everything, and you use that to light the face of the subject. So that's probably the #1 way professionals would do that. The other possibility, if you have the time and a very willing subject, you put the camera on a tripod and you do a bracketed exposure sequence, so you get one for the front and one for the back, and then you combine the two.
How about doing this on a phone?
You can do either of those two things on a phone as well, but it takes a little more gimcrackery. I mean, there are a couple of programs, Leonardo, Image Blender, are two of them that let you combine different exposures. You actually can control the exposure on an iPhone to some degree by where you tap with the native camera app, but also by using either Red Dot Plus camera or Camera Plus app. And you can actually control the exposures, and then you can combine and blend them.
Yes, thank you.
On average, I guess, piggybacking off that question, how long do you take from actually taking the photo or even setting up for the image and to the whole post-processing part of the workflow to where you're like, this is done, this is complete? Like, how long does that typically take you on average?
Yeah, it's hard to give you a single number on that. It really depends on the image. I mean, the image I posted on the top of my blog from the Brooklyn Bridge last night, if anyone wants to look at that, was about an hour. Some images take months.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Hi. Any advice you would give about getting into like model photography or like people photography? Because as a software developer, I find it's pretty easy to go and shoot like landscapes, but when photos involve people you have to direct, that it's a bit harder.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of your question, but it's a good question. I would say actually starting with models is a good idea. Because there's some basics about how you want to compose and light people that you can learn with a model, and a professional model is actually a very good person to help guide you to how to do it and to learn what works and doesn't work, and also how to use studio lighting if that's how you're doing it. So, and actually professional models are really not that expensive for photographers to hire. So it's a typical going rate's about $100 an hour. And so you said model and then portraits, and the two are pretty different things, really. But I would consider starting with a model, and I would consider finding a meetup or photography club or something like that that organizes model shoots for the first couple of times, so that you don't have to worry about getting the studio lights together in the studio space and hiring the model and everything like that, so you can kind of see how it's done. It's not very hard to take basic pictures of people in a studio that are well lit. Okay. What becomes hard is to take something that says something about the person and so on, and that comes back to become a more interesting person, because to do that you need to have a dialogue with the person, they need to feel at ease with you, you need to feel a way to get them to reveal themselves. There's a very famous portrait that the photographer Arnold Newman took of the industrialist Krupp, who in Germany had these, he employed slave labor during the period up to the Second World War and so on. And he managed to get Krupp to pose with lighting in front of his factory so that Krupp looks like he basically is a walking skull on top. It's a very evil portrait. He conveys the man completely, and the man was very careful to try to not put himself in that situation. And the rumor is that some of Krupp's people tried to steal the negative back from him after they realized what he'd done. So the right kind of portrait can be very revealing, but you need to understand the person that you're trying to make the portrait of. It's not really something that's easy to do in a flip way. The technical side of it, though, as I said at the beginning of this talk, is really not that hard.
Hey, Harold, thanks for coming to talk to us. This is the brightest light I've ever seen in my life, by the way, Shilpa, just a heads up.
Tell me about it.
So I was curious, for amateurs or semi-professional photographers that are looking to increase their income in a saturated photography market, do you have any suggestions for the most efficient manner of making that happen, besides, the whole art and the hobby form of that? There's a lot of us that might be interested in paying off. some of the gear that's been
Well, that's a very interesting question. And there are several different ways I can address it, really. One thing I would say as an overview is that the various things that have decimated part of the business of photography, for example, the sort of lower-end wedding photography business is dead, and that's because Cousin Joe takes the photos, and as someone notoriously said, we're all photographers these days. But the very same forces that have done that have also led to increased opportunities too. And that's a very interesting thing. I mean, I, for example, recently licensed a whole lot of photos for an annual report to a hedge fund based in Singapore. They found me on my Flickr stream. This is something that you could have only done through an agent, if at all, 20 years ago. So Google search giveth and Google search taketh in this particular realm. And the people who know how to use social media correctly probably are the winners here. What I tell students who ask that question, and they're all full of marketing schemes, the best thing you can do is to really do beautiful photos or great photos and get them out there. Cream does tend to rise to the top, and actually if you put things on a website or a blog or a photo sharing site, if it's a really good image, people will notice it. So that's really my recommendation. It doesn't sound terribly commercial, but it works.
Perfect. Thank you.
When you're talking about posting, is there a platform that's worked best for you? Is it Flickr? Is it Tumblr? Is it Instagram? Like where do you find the most success in drawing in followers?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, every professional photographer I know who makes a living at it has found their own unique paths. So whatever I do is likely to not work for somebody else. My most important venue is my own blog. Okay, I've been blogging since 2005, 10 to 30 stories a month, and I do it for myself. It's my day book. The way Edward Weston, the photographer, had a day book. He kept notes about his photography. I get for a niche blog, I have a reasonably high readership, and I get solicited to place advertisements on it. I long ago decided the only thing I'm advertising is me. So, it's a commercial-free site, and that really works quite well for me. It's a WordPress blog, but one that I maintain myself on with a bulletproof WordPress host. And so that works well. Flickr's worked very well for me. I'm not a big Facebook person, but I have to maintain a presence there and on Twitter, so on. Just however they want to find me, they can find me.
It was funny. So I was reading Harold's blog, and it says that you are not a fan of the generation of selfies, but you still embrace social media and all the platforms, which is great. Just because the world is taking selfies and there's a lot of things that are promoting and devices that are selling because of them. Why are you feeling, what are your opinions about that?
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a little personal frustration in that I'll go someplace to photograph and I'll get out my tripod and I'll get out the 36 megapixel camera and I'll put a nice piece of Zeiss glass on it, and then somebody's going to run up with their selfie stick and camera and get right in front of me and whatever I'm photographing. It's like, oh, please. But I don't know. I don't get the urge, really. I mean, it's like, maybe I'm not in love with my own face enough or something, but why put I think it's about, so I do a lot of traveling. I'm going to be in 5 or 6 countries in the next 2 months, and a lot of them are wonderful places, and it's fun to go there, but I think that a lot of these selfie things are about proving that one has had these experiences rather than actually having the experiences. And that's, I think, what it really comes down to for me.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. So my last question to leave us with today is, where is one place that you're looking to photograph next, and what story have you still not told that you are wanting to still share with the world?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to this wonderful, huge cave in Vietnam next month. It's big enough to put a skyscraper in. It's got its own rivers, ecosystems, plants, and cavern, like cathedral-like entrances. It's about a day's walk in the jungle to get to the entrance. So that's high on my list. I'm also going to the mountains in the north of Vietnam on the Chinese border where there are tribal languages spoken.
Oh, wow, that sounds amazing.
But there are many parts of this beautiful world, and I've seen only a few so far, so there is much that I want to do. The broader question, I really just, in as humble a way as I can, I just want to work to be the best person, artist, and part of our society that I can be. That's really...
Thank you so much. Well said. Very beautifully said. We have one more last question, I guess, from the audience. So, Joe?
Sorry, just one more. So just a comment on, or a question on your last comment. You take so many majestic photos and go to so many beautiful places, which is great. But I think for beginning photographer, it could also be inhibiting because I'm never going to go to that crazy cavern. So should I even bother taking a picture? What are some examples of some mundane things that you've seen that you've made into great photos?
Well, I mentioned a couple of them just a short while ago. For example, the Brooklyn Bridge last night, and the fire hydrant I photographed on the way up here, and even that tool bench with the Russian thing that I started my slide off with, or a Nautilus Shell. These are things that are accessible to everyone. I think New York is a great place to photograph, and there's some wonderful images to be made here. In fact, looking at New York and coming back, I grew up here and have been away for maybe a quarter of a century living other places. Coming back here, it's amazing what transformation is happening all around and everywhere, and what an incredible thing to photograph. I would just also make one other comment, and that is that I'm a believer in a concept called resistance, that something tries to stop us from being our creative best selves. And what you said is one form, it's one I feel too, one form of resistance. One form of resistance for me is I have to get somewhere. I have to take one of my kids to a doctor, whatever it is. And so I don't stop to make the photo. But what you're saying, it's already been done, why should I bother, is another form of resistance. And generally, whenever you feel that, the best thing you can do is say, screw you, resistance, I'm gonna do it.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for being with us here at Talks at Google. It's a pleasure having you. The books are in the back of the room. Everyone grab a copy of the Photographer's Black and White Handbook. And if you can stick around, hopefully you can sign a few.
It'd be my great pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.